Early March 1943, Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea. Captain Paul Irvin Gunn's hands, slick with engine oil, lost their grip on the wrench as he examined the aircraft before him. This was no ordinary bomber. What stood in the hangar defied Army Air Force regulations, disregarded protocol, and had never received official sanction from his superiors. The B-25 Mitchell medium bomber, originally built for precise high-altitude bombing, had been radically altered. Where the glass nose for a bombardier should have been, 850 caliber machine guns jutted forward, turning the aircraft into a formidable offensive weapon designed to hunt enemy ships and disrupt Japanese supply lines. It was an experimental conversion, unauthorized and dangerous, yet its potential to influence the Pacific theater was immense. For Gunn, success promised strategic advantage, failure could mean a court-martial. No one, not Gunn nor any Allied officer, anticipated that this unconventional modification, driven by both ingenuity and personal resolve, would play a pivotal role in delivering the Japanese Navy its most catastrophic defeat in the Pacific. The fate of Allied operations in the Southwest Pacific was being determined not in strategic briefings in Washington, but in the maintenance shops and aircraft hangars of Port Moresby, guided by the vision of a 43-year-old aviator working outside official channels. Gunn's journey to this critical moment began more than 2 years earlier, on December 8, 1941 in Manila. At that time, he was not yet a figure known to history as Pappy. He stood at Nichols Field, watching in horror as Japanese bombers methodically dismantled the American air presence in the Philippines. As the manager of the fledgling Philippine Airlines, Gunn had at his disposal 4 Red Beach 18 civilian planes. Within hours, Major General Louis Brereton would requisition these aircraft, commissioning Gunn as a captain in the Army Air Forces, a role that would extend far beyond the brief wartime service initially expected. Now 42 years old, Gunn was a seasoned aviator and former Navy Chief Petty Officer who had retired after 2 decades of service. His career had spanned training at Pensacola Naval Air Station, flying with the renowned Top Hatters Fighter Squadron and surviving countless missions, crashes, and mechanical failures. He possessed intimate knowledge of aircraft, gained not from manuals, but from years of practical experience in the cockpit and on the tarmac. Yet none of this expertise could shield him from the immediate crises of December 1941. His family, his wife Clara Louise, known to friends as Polly, and their 4 children remained in Manila as Japanese forces advanced. His teenage sons, Paul Jr. and Nathan, and younger daughters, Connie and Julie, were at risk as the city's defenses collapsed. Gunn's comfortable expatriate life, built around running the airline, had vanished overnight. In the weeks that followed, he undertook reconnaissance and transport missions across the crumbling Philippine defenses. He narrowly avoided enemy fighters, survived being shot down over the jungle, trekked to safety, and immediately returned to the cockpit. On one mission, he earned the Distinguished Flying Cross for piloting an unarmed transport into Bataan to deliver medical supplies to American forces under siege, navigating hostile airspace with nothing but skill and audacity. Despite these heroic efforts, Gunn could not reach his family. On Christmas Eve 1941, he received orders to evacuate key personnel to Australia. Drawing all available military pay and borrowing additional funds from fellow officers, he prepared to secure his family's escape. These desperate actions marked the beginning of a 3-year period in which Gunn would blend innovation, determination, and a personal quest for justice into the development of revolutionary aircraft that would help redefine the air war in the Pacific. The Japanese offensive moved with relentless speed. There was no pause, no margin for delay. Gunn's family failed to reach the airstrip before evacuation flights were cut off. Faced with an impossible decision, he stood at a crossroads: remain behind and violate direct orders, or leave them and fulfill his duty. He chose to fly south to Australia not out of indifference, but because military command allowed no exceptions. The conflict outweighed personal tragedy. To stay would have meant imprisonment or execution, rendering him useless to both his family and the war effort. That decision would haunt him. On January 20, 1942, scarcely weeks later, Japanese forces began systematic arrests of enemy nationals in Manila. Polly and the children were seized and transported to the University of Santo Tomas, which had been repurposed into an internment facility for civilians considered hostile to the empire. When word of their capture reached Gunn, something inside him fractured. The officer who continued flying combat missions afterward was no longer the same man who had departed the Philippines. He had left behind his wife and 4 children under the control of an occupying force infamous for its cruelty. Each sunrise they endured in captivity was another reminder of his powerlessness. He could not shield them, he could not intervene. The only weapon left to him was time. If he could shorten the war cripple, the enemy's ability to move, resupply, and reinforce, then perhaps fewer days would pass before liberation came. What followed was not doctrine. It was not strategy approved by any command. It was rage channeled into experimentation, revenge masked as tactical progress. In late July 1942, Major General George C. Kenney arrived in Brisbane to assume command of Allied air operations in the Southwest Pacific. What he encountered bordered on collapse. His predecessor had already been dismissed. Aircraft were outdated or unsuitable. Pilot confidence was dangerously low. Japanese forces dominated the skies above New Guinea and posed a credible threat to Australia itself. General Douglas MacArthur, overseeing the theatre, had little faith in his air arm, and he made no effort to hide it. Kenney, 53 years old, was no desk-bound commander. A veteran of World War I, he had flown fighters in combat, scored confirmed aerial victories, and earned a Silver Star. He had later served as an instructor at the Air Corps Tactical School, where he gained a reputation for challenging accepted doctrine. When MacArthur subjected him to a lengthy critique of Allied air failures, Kenney listened without interruption. When the lecture ended, he made a single request: full authority to remove anyone he deemed ineffective. MacArthur, taken aback but intrigued, agreed. The transformation began immediately. Kenney dismantled the existing command hierarchy and replaced complacent officers with younger, aggressive leaders. He established a forward headquarters closer to the front lines in New Guinea, cutting through layers of bureaucracy that had slowed operations. To further accelerate decision-making, he appointed Brigadier General Ennis Whitehead as his forward air commander, granting him unprecedented freedom to reassign aircraft based on real-time weather, terrain, and enemy movement without waiting for approval from Brisbane. Yet leadership alone could not solve the core problem. Allied bombing tactics were failing catastrophically. Medium and high-altitude attacks against Japanese shipping produced almost no results. Bombs dropped from altitude gave enemy vessels ample time to maneuver. Even the famed B-17 flying fortresses were achieving hit rates below 1%. Meanwhile, Japanese convoys continued supplying their garrisons in New Guinea virtually unchallenged. Allied soldiers fought and died in the jungle while fresh enemy troops arrived by sea, protected by the very limitations of Allied air doctrine. Kenney had wrestled with this problem for years. As early as 1928, while teaching at the tactical school, he had explored an alternative approach: low-level attacks using a technique later known as skip bombing. By releasing bombs just above the surface, pilots could cause them to ricochet across the water, striking ships along their hulls where armor was weakest and flooding was most lethal. The physics worked. The theory was sound. But practice was another matter. Flying at mast height exposed aircraft to intense anti-aircraft fire. Heavy bombers like the B-17 lacked forward-firing guns, leaving crews defenseless during the approach. Without suppression, attacking at low altitude bordered on suicidal. Then Kenney learned of an unauthorized experiment already underway. In August 1942, reports reached Kenney that someone within the 3rd Attack Group was altering A-20 Havoc light bombers without official approval. The modifications were improvised and inelegant but remarkably effective. The aircraft's blast bombardier nose had been removed. In its place, multiple Bot 50 caliber machine guns had been installed, all fixed forward. The concept was simple: attack at extremely low altitude, rake enemy positions with concentrated fire to silence gunners, then release bombs at point-blank range. Kenney investigated personally. At the center of it all was Captain Paul Gunn. Working largely alone, Gunn had scavenged weapons from wrecked fighters and adapted them to aircraft never designed for such firepower. He had no engineering diploma, no formal authorization, but he possessed something rarer: an intuitive grasp of aircraft structure, balance, recoil forces, and weapon integration earned through nearly 20 years of hands-on experience. He learned by testing, by failing, by trying again. Under normal circumstances, Gunn would have been court-martialed on the spot for unauthorized modification of military aircraft. Instead, Kenny recognized that he was looking at the future of air warfare in the Pacific. And from that moment forward, the balance in the skies would begin to shift. General George Kenny wasted no time after meeting the young officer. He immediately brought him onto his personal staff, assigning him the title of Special Projects Officer and handing him what seemed like an unrealistic task. Every A-20 bomber in the theater was to be converted for low-level attack operations, and it had to be done without delay. Gunn threw himself into the assignment with relentless intensity. He routinely worked shifts lasting 18 hours or more, scavenging usable weapons from wrecked aircraft, improvising gun mounts in crude field workshops, and personally taking each modified aircraft into the air to verify its performance. His changes were extensive. 450 caliber machine guns were installed in the nose of every A-20, additional weapons were mounted along the fuselage, and new bomb racks were added to carry parachute-retarded fragmentation bombs. By September 1942, the modified A-22s were ready for combat. Their first major test came during an attack on a Japanese airfield at Buna. The outcome surpassed even the most optimistic expectations. Flying in at treetop height, the newly christened Strafer, A-22s unleashed torrents of gunfire as they approached, neutralizing anti-aircraft defenses moments before releasing their bombs. Japanese forces, accustomed to high-altitude bombing raids that offered minutes of warning, were caught completely off guard. The strike obliterated dozens of aircraft on the ground and proved that low-level strafing attacks could fundamentally change the nature of air combat. Recognizing the implications immediately, Kenny ordered Gunn to begin adapting a much larger aircraft for the same role: the B-25 Mitchell medium bomber. Compared to the A-20, the Mitchell had greater range, a larger bomb load, and the structural capacity to carry far more forward-firing weapons. If it could be transformed into a gunship, it had the potential to become the most devastating anti-shipping aircraft in the Pacific theater. Originally conceived in 1939, the B-25 was designed as a medium-altitude level bomber. It was a twin-engine aircraft with a wingspan of 67 feet 7 inches, powered by two Wright R2600 radial engines generating 1,700 horsepower each. In its standard configuration, the Mitchell carried 6 defensive 50 caliber machine guns and up to 3,000 pounds of bombs. A typical crew consisted of 5 men: pilots, co-pilots, bombardier, radio operator, and gunner. The aircraft was named in honor of General Billy Mitchell, the outspoken and controversial proponent of air power who had been court-martialed in 1925 for his uncompromising views on military aviation. Despite the controversy surrounding its namesake, the B-25 would go on to become one of the most widely produced American bombers of the war. Nearly 9,900 units were manufactured at North American aviation plants in California and Kansas. The Mitchell achieved early fame in April 1942 when Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle led 16 B-25Bs on a bold strike against Tokyo, launching from the deck of the aircraft carrier USS Hornet. While the raid caused limited physical destruction, its psychological impact was immense. It boosted American morale in the aftermath of Pearl Harbor and compelled Japan to retain fighter units for homeland defense instead of deploying them to the front. Despite this success, the B-25's primary mission remained medium-altitude bombing, a role in which it performed poorly against moving ships. Gunn, however, saw possibilities others had overlooked. The aircraft's spacious nose could accommodate multiple heavy machine guns. Its twin-engine layout offered survivability in combat, allowing it to return home even after losing an engine. Its rugged airframe could withstand significant damage, and most importantly, its range allowed it to reach Japanese shipping routes beyond the reach of shorter-legged aircraft like the A-20. Late in 1942, Gunn began modifying B-25 seconds inside a maintenance hangar at Townsville, Australia. Working alongside him was Captain Jack Fox, North American Aviation's technical representative in the region. Officially, Fox's job was to prevent unauthorized alterations that deviated from factory standards. In reality, he became Gunn's willing partner in what would become the most effective unsanctioned aircraft modification program of the entire war. The first step was drastic but logical. The bombardier's position and its vulnerable glass nose was removed entirely. This not only reduced weight but eliminated a crew role that served no purpose during low-altitude attacks. In its place, Gunn installed a solid metal nose housing 450 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, all fixed forward and controlled directly by the pilot. Each weapon carried 500 rounds, and with a firing rate of roughly 850 rounds per minute per gun, the aircraft could saturate a target with devastating force in a matter of seconds. Even this was not enough. Gunn added 2 additional 50 caliber guns in cheek-mounted blisters on either side of the forward fuselage, positioned just behind and below the cockpit. These package guns protruded slightly ahead of the propeller arc, ensuring safe firing paths. Like the nose guns, they were fixed forward, further increasing the aircraft's offensive capability. Then came Gunn's most unorthodox decision. The B-25 was equipped with a dorsal turret behind the cockpit, armed with twin 50 caliber machine guns designed to defend against attacks from above and behind. Gunn permanently locked the turret facing forward, bringing its guns under pilot or co-pilot control. Using a cockpit-mounted sight or a master firing switch, the crew could now unleash all forward weapons at once. With these changes complete, the modified B-25 carried 8 forward-firing 50 caliber machine guns capable of hurling nearly 180 pounds of metal every second. By comparison, a P-51 Mustang fighter carried 6 such guns. The Mitchell now concentrated more forward firepower than a single fighter aircraft, while still retaining the ability to carry roughly 2,000 pounds of bombs. These unprecedented modifications pushed the airframe to its limits and introduced serious engineering challenges. But they also transformed the B-25 into something entirely new, a flying battering ram that would redefine low-level air attack and permanently alter Allied air tactics in the Pacific. Adding significant mass to the aircraft's nose caused a forward shift in its center of gravity, resulting in a pronounced nose-heavy condition that made the plane harder to maneuver. To counter this, Gunn systematically redistributed onboard equipment and added ballast to the tail section to restore balance. The simultaneous discharge of 8 heavy machine guns generated intense recoil forces, putting substantial stress on the airframe. To reinforce the aircraft, additional structural bracing was installed in the nose section. The guns also produced extreme heat and dense smoke during firing, raising the risk of onboard fires. Gunn addressed this by implementing enhanced ventilation systems and relocating ammunition storage to safer areas, minimizing potential hazards. A critical technical challenge remained, harmonizing the 8 forward-firing guns so that their projectiles converged at a predetermined point ahead of the aircraft, usually between 200 and 400 yards. Without precise alignment, bullets would scatter, missing the target entirely. Gunn devised a methodical ground-based testing protocol in which targets were set at specific distances. Each gun mount was carefully adjusted until all 8 weapons were perfectly synchronized to converge on the designated point. He personally conducted live fire tests, making meticulous fine-tuning adjustments and refusing to approve any aircraft that failed to meet his rigorous standards. The full modification of a single plane required roughly 2 weeks of continuous effort, and Gunn trained maintenance personnel to replicate the process, establishing efficient production line procedures. By December 1942, a sufficient number of B-25 seconds had been upgraded to outfit the 91st Bombardment Squadron. Command of this specialized squadron required a leader with expertise in low-altitude attack tactics and a willingness to challenge conventional bombing methods. Kenny selected Major Ed Larner, a pilot whose rapid rise from first lieutenant to major had been fueled by exceptional combat performance and bold leadership. Larner's proven skill in low-level operations earned Kenny's confidence. Together, Larner and Gunn developed attack strategies that would significantly alter naval engagement tactics. The modified B-25 seconds were designed to approach enemy ships at extremely low altitudes, sometimes as low as 50 feet above the water, while maintaining top speed, roughly 300 mph. At this altitude and velocity, shipboard gunners had great difficulty tracking the aircraft. The rapid approach made manual aiming virtually impossible, as the planes would pass the target before defenders could adjust. During the attack run, pilots unleashed all 8 forward-firing guns at approximately 1,000 yards, gradually bringing fire onto the target ship. The concentrated stream of 50 caliber rounds swept the decks, neutralizing anti-aircraft crews, destroying gun positions, shredding superstructures, and generating chaos. The goal of this strafing was not necessarily to sink the vessel, although it could cause significant damage. Its primary purpose was to suppress defensive fire and create psychological disarray among the crew. Once the defensive threat was reduced, the bomb attack followed. At a distance of 200 to 400 yards and minimal safe altitude, pilots released bombs equipped with delayed fuses of 4 to 5 seconds. Traveling at 300 ft, the bombs struck the water and skipped along the surface, often bouncing once or twice before hitting the ship's side at or just below the waterline. The delayed fuse allowed the bomb to penetrate the hull before detonation. This technique maximized damage to the ship's most vulnerable sections beneath the armor belt, where the hull was thinnest. Water's incompressibility amplified the explosive force, transmitting shock waves efficiently through the vessel. A single bomb could compromise the keel, rupture fuel tanks, flood engine compartments, and cause catastrophic structural failure. By the time the bomb detonated, the B-25 had already cleared the target area, ascending sharply to evade the blast and any secondary explosions. This combination of carefully engineered modifications, precise gunnery alignment, tactical innovation, and daring low-altitude piloting transformed the B-25 into a highly effective weapon against enemy naval vessels. The integration of structural reinforcement, fire suppression measures, gun harmonization, and coordinated low-level attack tactics created a system capable of overwhelming ship defenses with both firepower and psychological shock. The entire sequence of the attack, from the first bursts of gunfire to the moment the bombs struck, unfolded in roughly 10 seconds. While the concept of skip bombing was not entirely new, having been explored in experiments by the British and independently by some American pilots, the innovation lay in merging this technique with overwhelming frontal firepower. The modifications to the aircraft, particularly the installation of forward-firing guns in the bomber's nose, transformed it into a mobile gun platform capable of neutralizing defensive positions before releasing its payload. This synergy of tactics and firepower would soon prove to be extraordinarily lethal. As engineers were modifying planes, Allied intelligence units were actively monitoring Japanese naval movements. The Ultra program, which had successfully deciphered Japanese naval codes, offered precise insight into enemy operations. FREL, the fleet radio unit in Melbourne, intercepted Japanese communications almost in real time. Toward the end of February 1943, FREL picked up signals suggesting the assembly of a major Japanese convoy at Rabaul on New Britain. The convoy's intended destination was along New Guinea's northern coastline, carrying reinforcements and supplies for Japanese troops engaged against advancing Allied forces in Papua. The intelligence was detailed and specific. 8 transport vessels would carry roughly 6,900 soldiers from the 51st Division, accompanied by 8 destroyers for protection. According to intercepted schedules, the convoy was set to leave Rabaul at midnight on February 28, 1943, and expected to reach its target in about 3 days. This operation represented Japan's most significant attempt to reinforce its New Guinea positions. A successful mission would bolster Japanese forces considerably, potentially halting Allied progress. Conversely, failure would mean the loss of thousands of veteran soldiers and likely prevent Japan from mounting another major maritime reinforcement. Recognizing both the strategic importance of this convoy and the opportunity to test newly modified aircraft, General Kenny organized a full-scale air offensive. Every available aircraft in the theater was mobilized for a synchronized strike. The assault would involve medium-altitude B-17 Flying Fortresses, low-level strafing by Royal Australian Air Force fighters, P-38 Lightnings providing air cover, and B-25 bombers modified for skip bombing. This operation marked the largest coordinated aerial effort in the Southwest Pacific up to that point. On February 28th, Kenny personally briefed squadron leaders, delivering clear and uncompromising orders: locate the convoy, strike relentlessly, allow no escape, and ensure the destruction of all ships. This was not intended as a mere raid, it was a campaign of total annihilation. As midnight struck, the Japanese convoy departed Simpson Harbor at Rabaul under the command of Rear Admiral Masatami Kimura, who directed operations from the destroyer Shiranayuki. The convoy included 8 transport ships: Kyoko Maru, Kembaru, Tayo Maru, Nojima, Io Maru, Ta Maru, Shinimaru, and Oawa Maru, escorted by 8 destroyers, Shiranayuki. Approximately 100 Zero fighters were assigned to provide air cover throughout the voyage. This represented the largest and most heavily protected resupply effort Japan had attempted. Kimura anticipated some losses, as prior convoys to New Guinea had suffered significant damage, yet Japanese commanders believed sufficient ships would reach their destination with reinforcements intact. Their assessment proved overly optimistic. The convoy was first sighted that afternoon by a patrolling B-24 Liberator, which relayed the position, composition, and course to Allied command. Reconnaissance aircraft were immediately dispatched to maintain visual contact. Weather initially favored the Japanese, as 2 tropical storms moved through the region, shrouding the convoy in clouds and limiting effective Allied attacks. Despite this, Allied aircraft maintained tracking and prepared for the strike. The convoy advanced at approximately 7 knots, constrained by the heavily loaded transports. Though the destroyers could reach speeds exceeding 20 knots, they had to conform to the convoy's slower pace. By nightfall on March 1, the Japanese vessels had covered nearly 90 miles, placing them roughly halfway to their New Guinea destination. As March 2, 1943 progressed, the weather remained a significant factor in operations. Rear Admiral Kimura viewed the worsening conditions favorably, as heavy storms reduced the likelihood of Allied airstrikes. However, the same turbulent seas took a severe toll on his convoy. Soldiers crammed into the lower decks suffered greatly from seasickness, their discomfort amplified by the constant rolling of the transport ships. By morning, conditions began to improve marginally, allowing Allied reconnaissance aircraft to re-establish visual contact with the Japanese formation. Around 10 a.m., 29 B-17 Flying Fortresses initiated a bombing run from an altitude of 5,000 feet. Predictably, the high-altitude approach limited the effectiveness of their payloads. While the crews reported scoring hits, Japanese post-action records indicate that damage to the transports was negligible, with at most 1 ship sustaining minor harm. Despite the limited destruction, the attack achieved the tactical objective. It forced the convoy to make repeated course adjustments, slowing its approach to Leh. Throughout the remainder of March 2, the B-17 seconds continued their intermittent strikes, dropping bombs from multiple heights and forcing the Japanese vessels into evasive maneuvers. Japanese fighter planes engaged the bombers, shooting down 3, but at the cost of several Allied aircraft sustaining damage. The assaults, though persistent, did not incapacitate the convoy. Their primary effect was to disrupt and harass rather than halt the Japanese advance. By nightfall, Allied commanders anticipated a decisive strike for the following morning. Major Lana had meticulously briefed his pilots, ensuring every member of the strike force understood their role. On February 28th, crews had rehearsed the attack on a wrecked vessel, practicing skip bombing techniques, coordinating strafing runs, and confirming the harmonization of aircraft weaponry. By March 3, all preparations were complete, including the loading of ordnance and fine-tuning of attack formations. At dawn on March 3, weather conditions became ideal for an air assault. Skies cleared, visibility was excellent, and the sea was calm. Kimura, observing the conditions, likely sensed the vulnerability of his convoy. The fleet was within approximately 30 miles of Leh, close enough for land-based anti-aircraft batteries to provide partial support, yet still exposed to a coordinated aerial strike. The Allied attack force assembled at Cape Ward Hunt on Papua's northern coast, consisting of around 90 aircraft. This included B-17 Flying Fortresses for diversionary bombing, modified B-25 bombers equipped for low-altitude strafing, P-38 Lightning fighters for escort, and Royal Australian Air Force aircraft assigned to suppress enemy anti-aircraft defences. The assault was planned in successive waves, approaching the convoy from multiple directions. The operation commenced near 10 a.m. Initial medium-altitude B-17 strikes drew attention and forced the transports to maneuver defensively. Following them, low-flying aircraft entered the attack zone. The RAAF fighters initiated strafing runs with a combination of 20mm cannons and machine guns, disrupting anti-aircraft positions. Japanese destroyers responded with heavy fire, but the aircraft's speed minimized their exposure to enemy gunners. Modified B-25 bombers then executed their primary role in the attack. One pilot targeted the transport Kyokus Maru, descending to just 50 feet above the water. From approximately 1,000 yards, the aircraft opened fire with its combined 50-caliber machine guns, unleashing over 6,800 rounds per minute and expelling roughly 180 pounds of ammunition per second. Tracer fire highlighted the trajectory of each burst, cutting a path from the ship's bow to its superstructure, devastating crew positions, anti-aircraft emplacements, and the bridge. Once in position, the pilot released two 500-pound general-purpose bombs with delayed fuses. Skipping across the water approximately 200 yards from the vessel, they struck the hull just below the waterline. The subsequent underwater detonations tore open the ship's engine room and cargo holds, causing it to list sharply and sink within 15 minutes. Other B-25 crews replicated the same attack profile on successive targets. The transport Kembaru endured multiple assaults, suffering concentrated strafing that neutralized crew members on deck, followed by 4 bombs that penetrated the hull. The ship split and sank in under 10 minutes. Similarly, Taeyong Maru experienced intense gunfire across its superstructure, with 2 bombs breaching the hull, sparking uncontrollable fires. The combined effect of these coordinated waves resulted in catastrophic damage to the Japanese convoy. While initial high-altitude B-17 strikes had disrupted navigation, it was the low-level B-25 strafing and skip bombing that inflicted decisive destruction. The meticulously rehearsed strategy demonstrated how coordinated multi-altitude attacks, integrating different aircraft types and tactical approaches, could overwhelm even heavily defended transports in hostile waters. Nearly 1,000 Japanese troops remained aboard a transport that was doomed to sink. The ship Najima attempted evasive maneuvers, but its speed was insufficient to escape the assault. A B-25 bomber swept along the vessel from stern to bow, delivering strafing fire, and followed with 2 bombs directly into the engine compartment. Power was lost, water began flooding in, and the vessel would go under later that same day. Meanwhile, Allied bombers and fighter aircraft targeted the Japanese destroyers escorting the convoy. The destroyer Shirayuki, serving as Admiral Kimura's flagship, was struck by intense machine gun fire that decimated the bridge personnel, leaving Admiral Kimura wounded in the attack. A bomb detonated near the ship's stern, igniting a magazine fire that led to secondary explosions, tearing the stern away and sinking the vessel. Another destroyer, Tokitsu Kaz, suffered direct hits that ignited fuel tanks, reducing the ship to a blazing inferno and causing it to sink within an hour. The Arashio collided with the crippled transport Nojima while attempting to maneuver, sustaining severe damage. Unable to continue, the destroyer was abandoned and later sank. Throughout the engagement, Japanese Zero fighters made desperate attempts to defend the convoy, but P-38 Lightnings engaged them at high altitudes, effectively preventing interference. The B-25 seconds operated at very low altitude around the mast height of the ships, where enemy fighters could not attack without risking collisions with their own vessels. The coordination between the Allied aircraft was precise, and the initial attack lasted approximately 40 minutes. When the aircraft withdrew to refuel and rearm, the battlefield was catastrophic. 4 transports were either sinking or already destroyed, 3 destroyers had been lost, and the surviving ships were scattered, damaged, and in disarray. Hundreds of Japanese sailors and soldiers struggled in the water, while floating debris and burning oil slicks. Later that afternoon, Allied aircraft returned to target the remaining ships. Modified B-25 bombers systematically hunted down the stragglers attempting to reach Leh. Each vessel was singled out for attack. The low-flying strafers fired continuously, and bombs skipped across the water to strike precise targets. Additional transports were sunk, and the already damaged destroyer Asashio was hit again, eventually succumbing to the bombardment. By nightfall on March 3, all 8 transport ships and half of the 8 destroyers in the convoy had been destroyed. Approximately 3,000 Japanese personnel were killed or left struggling in the water, while around 2,700 were rescued by the remaining 4 destroyers or submarines dispatched from Rabaul. Only about 1,200 soldiers reached Leh, often without weapons or essential supplies. Out of the originally 6,900 troops aboard, over 5,700 became casualties, marking the operation as a near-total annihilation of the convoy. Allied losses were minimal in comparison. 1 B-17 Flying Fortress was downed, 3 P-38 fighters were lost in combat, and 13 crew members were killed. By contrast with the overwhelming Japanese losses, these numbers were negligible. The engagement, later termed the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, became a pivotal moment in the Pacific theater. It clearly demonstrated that well-coordinated land-based aircraft could decisively destroy heavily protected naval convoys. The battle confirmed the effectiveness of skit bombing techniques when combined with concentrated forward firepower and validated the modifications implemented on B-25 bombers. Critically, it forced Japan to reconsider resupplying its forces by sea in the Southwest Pacific, as large convoys were no longer viable. Japanese garrisons in New Guinea were gradually cut off, left to diminish as supply lines failed. General Douglas MacArthur issued a communiqué claiming 22 ships destroyed, including 3 cruisers and 7 destroyers, and over 12,000 Japanese killed. While the official figures were exaggerated, typical of wartime propaganda, the strategic consequences were undeniable. The success confirmed that the concepts developed by Kenny and Paul Gunn worked. Low-altitude, heavily armed B-25 seconds could overcome defenses and devastate enemy shipping. Watching the results from Australia, Gunn likely experienced grim satisfaction. His modifications had proven lethal, though his family remained in Stowe. Thomas and the war continued. Following the battle, the modification program accelerated rapidly. Kenny ordered all available B-25 seconds in the theater to be converted to the strafer configuration. Gunn expanded his efforts, training additional crews, refining attack techniques, and supervising increased production. By mid-1943, most B-25 seconds operating in the Southwest Pacific had received these modifications. North American Aviation, the manufacturer, took note, sending representatives to inspect Gunn's workshops, study the modifications, and request detailed specifications. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea had demonstrated not only the lethal potential of the aircraft, but also reshaped operational strategies for the Allied forces in the Pacific. The company aimed to integrate advancements in firearms into mass aircraft production. Gunn was promoted to the rank of major and reassigned to the United States, where he collaborated with North American Aviation at their Inglewood and Kansas City facilities. During late 1943 and early 1944, he worked closely with engineers to develop factory-built strafing versions of the B-25 Mitchell bomber. This collaboration resulted in the B-25G, which featured a formidable 75mm cannon mounted in the nose, complemented by 450 caliber machine guns. A total of 405 B-25Gs were produced. The 75mm weapon-fired shells weighing nearly 15 pounds, capable of penetrating armored ships or demolishing reinforced positions. However, the cannon presented significant challenges. It was cumbersome to reload, required a crew member stationed in the nose, and had a relatively slow firing rate. Gunn himself tested the B-25G under combat conditions, leading an attack with the 3rd Attack Group against a Japanese destroyer. His 75mm rounds struck the ship's fire control system, effectively disabling its gun coordination. The vessel was subsequently sunk by conventional bombs. Publicly, Gunn claimed that the cannon had destroyed the ship, though he privately acknowledged that the bombs were responsible for the final sinking. The B-25H succeeded the G model, retaining the 75mm cannon while introducing additional firepower, including up to 1450 caliber machine guns positioned at various points on the aircraft. Approximately 1,000 B-25Hs were manufactured. Key design changes included relocating the dorsal turret forward and removing the co-pilot seat to reduce weight, with the navigator taking over responsibility for loading the cannon. The enhancements dramatically increased the aircraft's firepower but created new difficulties. The B-25H became nose-heavy and challenging to handle. The Army Air Forces Development Center at Wright Field issued a warning that the modification posed safety risks, suggesting the aircraft be grounded until the center of gravity issue could be resolved. According to popular accounts, Gunn responded humorously that the center of gravity could be put in storage for the duration, reflecting his prioritization of combat effectiveness over technical perfection. Pilots adapted to the handling quirks, and subsequent production led to the B-25J, which became the most widely produced variant with 4,318 aircraft built. The J model offered a dual configuration. Some retained the traditional bombardier nose, while others continued with the strafing nose. Certain B-25Js were outfitted with 8 forward-firing nose guns, 4 guns mounted in cheek blisters, 2 in the dorsal turret, and 4 in the waist positions, totaling up to 1850 caliber machine guns. This made the B-25J the most heavily armed bomber of World War II. While such extensive armament was often more than necessary operationally, it served as a psychological deterrent, instilling fear in enemy forces. Japanese soldiers quickly learned to associate the roar of a Mitchell's engines with imminent danger. Throughout 1943 and 1944, these modified B-25 seconds inflicted severe damage across the Pacific. In August 1943, B-25 strafers struck Japanese airfields at WWII in New Guinea, destroying 174 aircraft on the ground and crippling Japanese air dominance in the region. These operations were made possible by Gunn's innovation in extending the aircraft's range. Auxiliary fuel tanks were installed in the bomb bay and jettisoned after use through an opening in the floor. Though rudimentary fuel fumes filled the cabin and air rushed through the fuselage, the system added several hundred miles of operational range. The WWII missions effectively ended Japanese air superiority over New Guinea, enabling Allied ground forces to advance with minimal aerial resistance. Gunn's emphasis on practical combat solutions, from innovative armament configurations to extending range, exemplified a philosophy in which battlefield effectiveness took precedence over engineering perfection. In November 1943, a remarkable aerial assault struck Rebel Harbor, showcasing the tactical innovation of the Allied air forces. Major Raymond Jock Henterbury led a formation of 38 B-25 Mitchell bombers modified for strafing against a heavily fortified Japanese port. Flying at masted heights, the bombers were supported by P-38 Lightning fighters providing cover from above, while white phosphorus bombs created a dense smokescreen to obscure their movements. Out of 38 vessels anchored in the harbor, 30 were directly hit. The strike resulted in the sinking or severe damage of a heavy cruiser, 3 destroyers, and numerous transports and auxiliary ships. The operation temporarily crippled Rebel as a strategic base and illustrated that even the most fortified Japanese positions could be penetrated by innovative use of the B-25. The following year, during the Philippines campaign of 1944, these gun-equipped B-25 seconds became essential in close air support for ground operations. They systematically targeted Japanese supply routes, disrupted troop movements, and attacked shipping throughout the archipelago. Their ferocious low-altitude attacks earned them the nickname "Bat Out of Hell," as the speed and aggression of their strikes left defenders almost no time to respond. While not the only tool contributing to Allied success in the Pacific, these aircraft proved among the most destructive, destroying hundreds of ships, thousands of aircraft on the ground, and inflicting heavy casualties on Japanese forces. Their effectiveness facilitated General MacArthur's island hopping strategy, isolating enemy garrisons and ensuring air superiority, which in turn enabled successful amphibious assaults. Meanwhile, Major Henterbury, known as Gunn, continued to wage his personal war. His family remained imprisoned at Santo Tomas internment camp in Manila. Occasional letters reached him through the Red Cross, but communication was sparse and heavily censored. Reports indicated worsening conditions, food shortages, disease outbreaks, and increasingly harsh treatment by Japanese guards as the tide of war turned against them. Despite the frustration and despair, Gunn persevered in his missions, driven by the hope that each sortie would bring an end to the conflict. By late 1944, American forces had commenced the invasion of Leyte in the Philippines. At 45 years old, Gunn remained active in combat, always seeking more effective ways to neutralize the enemy. During a night raid on Tacloban airfield, he was caught on the ground when Japanese bombers dropped white phosphorus ordnance. Shrapnel from the explosions severely injured his right shoulder, leaving the arm virtually unusable and causing intense pain. He was evacuated to Australia, where he underwent months of recovery. Although this injury ended his flying career, the war itself was nearing its conclusion. On February 3, 1945, elements of the 1st Cavalry Division, advancing as a flying column, liberated Santo Tomas. The cavalry arrived just in time to prevent the execution of the camp's leaders. Over 4,000 internees were freed, including Polly Henterbury and her 4 children who had endured more than 3 years of captivity. Weakened but alive, the family was reunited with Gunn in Australia a few weeks later. Polly had managed to keep the children together despite the severe hardships of internment, but the experience had left lasting physical and emotional scars. The family's reunion marked the end of their long separation, yet each member had been irreversibly changed by the ordeal. After recovering, Gunn continued his service in the Army Air Forces. Promoted to lieutenant colonel, he focused on aircraft modifications and tactical innovations, no longer participating in combat flights. He formally retired on June 30, 1948 with the rank of full colonel, medically retired due to his injuries. His decorations were numerous, including the Distinguished Flying Cross with an oak leaf cluster, the Silver Star, the Legion of Merit, the Air Medal, and 9 Purple Hearts, reflecting the multiple injuries sustained during his extensive combat career. Following his military retirement, Gunn returned to the Philippines to help rebuild the nation's air transport infrastructure, re-establishing Philippine Airlines and reconnecting isolated islands. Despite his age and prior injuries, he continued flying and taking calculated risks. Tragically, on October 11, 1957, just a week before his 58th birthday, Gunn's aircraft encountered a violent storm during a charter flight, resulting in a fatal crash. He was laid to rest at Barrancas National Cemetery at Naval Air Station Pensacola, Florida, leaving behind a legacy of innovation, courage, and relentless dedication to aviation. Gunn's contributions to aerial warfare were profound. The B-25 modifications he pioneered, particularly the gunship configuration, became standard practice, with thousands of B-25 seconds built or converted according to his designs. Techniques such as skip bombing, which he helped perfect, destroyed hundreds of Japanese ships and greatly enhanced Allied operational effectiveness in the Pacific. His work demonstrated that tactical innovation often arises from necessity and that determined individuals can influence the course of warfare. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea, which utilized these innovations, is still studied as a landmark example of the strategic use of air power against naval forces, combining intelligence, coordination, and inventive tactics to achieve decisive results with minimal losses. In a single devastating engagement, Allied forces annihilated 8 transport vessels and sank 4 destroyers, inflicting over 5,000 casualties while losing only 4 aircraft. The arithmetic of this encounter was stark and unforgiving. Survival was impossible in a theater where the enemy could not contest the skies. Every ship lost in the Bismarck Sea represented countless missions that would never be launched, hundreds of soldiers who would never reach the front, and thousands of rounds of ammunition that would never see action. Striking logistical chains before they could reach combat zones proved far more effective than engaging enemy troops directly. The B-25, adapted into a specialized attack platform, became the instrument that allowed this strategy to succeed. With its extended range, the aircraft could patrol vast expanses of ocean, suppress enemy defensive fire with concentrated weaponry, and deliver precise skip bombing strikes, returning safely for repeated sorties. One B-25 outfitted for these missions could achieve the impact that previously required coordinated attacks by a variety of aircraft types. Japan, however, learned the limits of its defensive strategy too late. Following the catastrophic Bismarck Sea operation, Japanese command recognized that daylight convoys within Allied air coverage were no longer viable. They shifted supply movements to nighttime operations, increasingly relied on submarines for critical materials, and dispersed supplies via small coastal barges hidden during the day. While these adjustments mitigated some losses, they did not prevent them. B-25 strafers adapted to hunt smaller vessels with the same precision as larger ships. Radar-equipped aircraft operating at night could locate and strike convoys even in total darkness. For Japanese logistics in the Southwest Pacific, there was no safe hour, no hidden route, and no protected harbor. Over time, this relentless pressure isolated Japanese forces across New Guinea, the Philippines, and the Pacific Islands. Soldiers continued to fight with shrinking stockpiles and without hope of reinforcement. Their bravery and persistence, however, could not overcome the strategic advantage gained by Allied air superiority. By 1945, the modified B-25 had become the principal weapon for anti-shipping operations in the Pacific theater. The aircraft evolved through GH&J variants, featuring increasingly robust armor and firepower, but its core principle remained unchanged. A medium bomber transformed into a heavily armed flying platform, capable of. Even as the war drew to a close in August 1945, these aircraft continued operational missions. Among them were the planes that escorted the Japanese delegation from Japan to Manila to formalize surrender, a symbolic testament to their role in ending the conflict. Post-war studies conducted by both American and Japanese historians confirmed the critical influence of these modifications. The innovations of the B-25 had reshaped the Pacific campaign, demonstrating that control of the air could render even the most determined opposition strategically powerless. After the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, Japanese naval officers recognized that operating near zones covered by Allied air bases had become exceedingly hazardous. The psychological toll on crews was as profound as the material losses inflicted. Convoy leaders understood that enemy bombers could emerge from nowhere, striking swiftly and annihilating entire formations before defensive measures could respond. Specially adapted B-25 aircraft introduced a revolutionary form of aerial warfare. These medium bombers combined the stealth and precision of a submarine with the destructive firepower of a cruiser. The strategic lessons of skit bombing and forward-firing armaments resonated far beyond the Pacific theater. In the post-war era, air forces around the globe examined these innovations closely, laying the foundation for the development of gunships aircraft primarily designed to engage targets with concentrated fire rather than conventional bombing. The AC-47, AC-119, and AC-130 gunships deployed during Vietnam and later conflicts can trace their conceptual roots to the modifications applied to the B-25. During World War II, a total of 9,890 B-25 seconds were produced. Today, more than 100 of these planes survive, most of them preserved in the United States. A number of these aircraft remain airworthy and participate in public airshows where spectators are awed by their size, distinctive engine roar, and historical significance. The Wright R-2600 engines, with their unmistakable growl, continue to evoke the intensity of their wartime missions. When a B-25 banks low over a runway, mimicking the maneuvers performed against Japanese shipping, observers gain a sense of the aircraft's impact during combat. Some B-25 seconds have been restored as strafe aircraft, equipped with forward-firing guns mounted in the nose. Demonstrations using blank ammunition showcase the overwhelming power of these weapons. The muzzle flash is visible, the aircraft shakes under recoil, and the sound is nearly deafening. Witnessing such demonstrations provides a visceral impression of the terror Japanese sailors experienced in the moments before their vessels were obliterated. Museums around the world display B-25 seconds in a variety of configurations. The National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, houses multiple examples, while the National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola, Florida, exhibits aircraft once used for instructional purposes. The Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum preserves several B-25 seconds, each telling a story of technical innovation, wartime necessity, and strategic achievement. In 1959, retired General George Kenney published a biography entitled Pappy Gunn, chronicling the life and wartime contributions of the engineer whose modifications had dramatically influenced the Pacific War. Kenny highlighted Gunn's innovative adaptations, his combat record, and his personal struggle to secure his family's release. According to Kenny, Gunn's unconventional efforts saved thousands of Allied lives and played a crucial role in hastening the end of hostilities. Nathaniel Gunn, Pappy's youngest son, later wrote additional accounts providing the family's perspective, describing life under occupation in Santa Thomas and the prolonged wait for liberation. The Gunn family narrative underscores both the human cost of war and the resilience required to endure it. In 1975, the United States Air Force honored Gunn posthumously by naming a training facility in his memory. The recognition came late. It acknowledged a career defined not by the pursuit of accolades, but by a relentless drive for practical effectiveness. Gunn's determination to defy conventional limitations, refusing to accept his family's imprisonment as inevitable, challenging the adequacy of existing weaponry, and circumventing restrictive regulations enabled him to produce a transformative military innovation. The modified B-25 Strafer inflicted heavy losses on Japanese shipping, destroyed hundreds of vessels, killed thousands of enemy troops, and materially contributed to Allied success in the Pacific. While it was not the sole weapon that secured victory in World War II, the aircraft's impact was remarkable relative to its numbers. It exemplifies the extraordinary outcomes achievable when ingenuity, personal motivation, and operational necessity converge. Born in a maintenance hangar out of urgency, the modified B-25 entered combat at treetop level, unleashing concentrated gunfire while dropping bombs that skipped across the water and struck below ship hulls. Its attacks disrupted Japanese supply lines, shortened the conflict, saved countless Allied lives, and ultimately freed a family from years of captivity. This story illustrates how innovation can emerge from unlikely sources, how unconventional methods can produce decisive effects, and how one individual's refusal to accept failure can ripple across history,